Thor's Oregon 1997 disappearance. Strange lights. Seen before hiker vanished. Before I tell you this story, I need you to hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. These stories take countless hours to research and produce. If you enjoy true mysterious disappearances like this one, subscribing ensures you won't miss our next chilling investigation. Now let me take you back to Oregon 1997, where something happened that still haunts me to this day. I never thought I'd share this story publicly. For 28 years, I've carried this burden alone, waking in cold sweats, seeing those lights when I close my eyes. But the world deserves to know what happened to my best friend, David Keller, in the mountains of Oregon in the summer of 1997. My name is Michael Cassidy. Back then I was 24, working a dead-end job at a hardware store in Portland. David and I had been friends since high school. He was the adventurous one, always planning our next hiking trip or camping weekend. I was more cautious, but he had a way of pulling me into his orbit of enthusiasm. "Life's too short to stay indoors, Mikey," he'd always say. That June, David suggested we take a week-long trek through the Mount Hood National Forest. He'd been reading about a remote trail system that supposedly led to pristine alpine lakes rarely visited by tourists. The isolation appealed to us both, a chance to escape the noise of the city and reconnect with something primal. We packed light but prepared for changing weather conditions. David had become almost obsessive about preparedness in recent months. 3 satellite phones, emergency beacons, detailed topographic maps. It seemed excessive even for him. "You expecting trouble up there?" I joked as we loaded his Jeep Cherokee. He paused, hands resting on a backpack strap. "Just being smart," he said, but something in his expression made me uneasy. "Been hearing strange things about that area." "What kind of strange things?" David shrugged, returning to his methodical packing. "Probably nothing. Campers reporting weird lights. A few hikers going off trail and turning up days later with no memory of where they'd been." I laughed nervously. "You've been watching too many X-Files episodes, man." He didn't laugh back. "Maybe. Or maybe there's something to it. I should have paid more attention to that conversation. I replay it constantly now, searching for clues I might have missed." The drive to our trailhead took about 3 hours, winding through increasingly remote terrain. The radio faded to static as mountains rose around us. David was uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. "You okay?" I asked after nearly an hour of silence. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking about what we might find out there." We reached the trailhead around noon. The small gravel parking area held just 2 other vehicles, a good sign that we'd have solitude on our journey. As we shouldered our packs, David pulled out a small notebook and jotted something down. "What's that?" I asked. "Journal," he replied. "Thought I'd document this trip properly." The first 2 days were uneventful but breathtaking. The trail climbed steadily through old-growth forest, massive Douglas firs creating cathedral-like spaces around us. We saw eagles soaring above ridgelines, startled a family of deer, and even spotted bear tracks near a small stream, though thankfully no actual bears. David seemed to relax as we hiked, the tension he'd carried from Portland gradually melting away. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. Wake at dawn, hike until mid-afternoon, set up camp and spend evenings talking by the fire. It felt like old times. On the 3rd night, we made camp on a ridge overlooking a valley that stretched for miles, distant mountains creating a jagged horizon. After dinner, as darkness settled around us, David became pensive again. "Do you ever think about how small we are?" he asked, staring into the fire. "Like there could be entire civilizations right beside us and we'd never know it." "What do you mean?" I prodded, opening another beer. "Dimensions, parallel realities, whatever you want to call it." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "The indigenous people who lived here believed this forest was a threshold place. Somewhere the veil between worlds was thin." I chuckled. "You getting metaphysical on me now?" "I'm serious, Mike." His eyes reflected the dancing flames. "My cousin Terry works for the Forest Service. Last year they had 3 separate search and rescue operations for hikers in this exact area. All 3 were eventually found, but each told the same story. They followed strange lights, thinking it was another hiker or ranger station. Next thing they knew, days had passed. A cold shiver ran down my spine despite the campfire's warmth. Missing time? Sounds like alien abduction stories from the supermarket tabloids. David didn't laugh. Terry said one guy was a geology professor from Reed College. Not exactly your typical conspiracy theorist. The professor described seeing lights that moved, with intelligence. When they found him 5 days later, his watch had stopped, and he was convinced he'd only been gone for a few hours. Batteries died, he got disoriented. Happens all the time in the wilderness, I reasoned. David nodded, but didn't seem convinced. He pulled out his journal again, writing by firelight. "What are you writing about now?" I asked. "Just recording our conversation in this." He pointed upward. I tilted my head back. The night sky was spectacular, crystal clear and filled with more stars than seemed possible. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like spilled cream. "I've never seen the stars so bright," I admitted. "We're miles from light pollution," David said. "That's what they'd want." "They?" He didn't answer, just kept writing. I should have pressed him further. I should have realized something was wrong. But instead I chalked it up to campfire spookiness and crawled into my tent shortly after. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of David's voice. Groggily, I unzipped my tent and peered out. He was standing at the edge of our campsite staring into the darkness below. His satellite phone was in his hand, and he was speaking urgently. "Yes, I'm seeing them right now," he was saying. "Just like you described. They're moving in patterns, not random, definitely not aircraft." I rubbed my eyes, confused. "David? Who are you talking to at this hour?" He startled, turning toward me. "Go back to sleep, Mike. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. As my vision adjusted to the darkness, I saw what had captured David's attention. In the valley below, perhaps a mile away, lights were moving through the forest. Not flashlights. These were blue-white orbs that pulsed with an inner luminescence. They moved in ways that defied explanation, sometimes floating serenely between trees, other times accelerating with impossible speed. "What the hell are those?" I whispered, suddenly wide awake. David lowered his phone. "I don't know, but they've been appearing here for decades. Terry's been tracking sightings. I counted at least 7 distinct lights. They seem to be moving in formation, creating geometric patterns before dispersing and reforming. Maybe it's some kind of atmospheric phenomenon," I suggested, my mouth dry. "Or bioluminescent organisms." David shook his head. "Bioluminescence doesn't hover 20 feet off the ground or move against the wind." As we watched, the lights began moving upward, climbing the opposite ridge in perfect synchronization. Then, without warning, they blinked out simultaneously. "We should leave in the morning," I said, unable to shake the feeling of being observed. "Head back to Portland." David turned to me, his face half illuminated by moonlight. "Are you kidding? This is exactly why we came here." "You knew about these lights before we left," I realized, anger building. This whole trip was about finding them, wasn't it? He had the decency to look guilty. I didn't know for certain. "Terry said they appear most often during the new moon, which is tonight. I thought maybe we'd see something, but I didn't want to get your hopes up." "My hopes up?" I hissed. "David, those things aren't natural. We need to get out of here." "Just one more night," he pleaded. "Tomorrow we'll hike down into that valley. If we don't find anything, we'll head back, I promise." I should have insisted we leave immediately. Instead, I reluctantly agreed to his compromise, too rattled to argue further. Neither of us slept much for what remained of the night. The morning brought clear skies and birdsong, making the previous night's events seem dreamlike. Over breakfast, David was animated, plotting our route into the valley where we'd seen the lights. "I've been thinking about it," he said between bites of instant oatmeal. "Those lights were concentrated in one area. There might be something there, a cave system, unusual mineral deposits, something that could explain what we saw." I wasn't convinced, but followed him as we broke camp and began descending toward the valley. The trail became less defined as we moved away from established routes, forcing us to navigate by compass and topographic map. By midday, we reached the approximate area where we'd spotted the lights from above. It was unremarkable, the same dense forest that covered much of the mountainside. David, however, moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to check his GPS coordinates against his notebook. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked as we pushed through thick underbrush. "Anomalies," he replied cryptically. "Anything that doesn't belong." For hours we searched without finding anything unusual. No strange rock formations, no disturbed earth, nothing that might explain what we'd witnessed. The afternoon wore on, and I was about to suggest we start heading back when David called out, "Mike, over here!" I followed his voice to a small clearing. In its center stood David, looking down at the ground. As I approached, I saw what had caught his attention. A perfect circle of flattened vegetation about 15 feet in diameter. The grass and ferns within the circle weren't broken or damaged, just uniformly pressed down as if a heavy object had rested there. Could be a bear bedding area, I suggested, though I knew bears didn't create such perfect geometries. David knelt at the edge of the circle, running his hands over the flattened plants. "Feel this," he said. Reluctantly, I joined him. The vegetation was warm to the touch, noticeably warmer than the surrounding plants despite being in shade. "It's still warm," David whispered, excitement evident in his voice. "Whatever made this was here recently." I stood up, suddenly uncomfortable. "We should go now. Just give me a few minutes to document this." He pulled out his phone and began taking photos of the circle from various angles, then removed a small sample bag from his pack and collected several of the flattened plants. "Since when did you become a paranormal investigator?" I asked, scanning the forest around us nervously. "I'm just being thorough," he replied, not looking up from his work. "Terry will want to see this." I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. "We've got maybe 3 hours of daylight left. If we leave now, we can make it back to last night's campsite before dark." David nodded, seemingly satisfied with his documentation. "Okay, let's head back." The return journey was tense. The forest, which had seemed merely wild before, now felt watchful. Shadows between trees seemed deeper, and every snapping twig made me jump. David walked ahead, occasionally stopping to write in his journal or check his GPS. We were about halfway back to our previous campsite when David abruptly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked, holding up a hand. I listened. At first I heard nothing beyond the usual forest sounds, wind in the canopy, distant birdsalls. Then I caught it, a low pulsating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It was barely audible but unmistakable once noticed, like the sound of distant power lines but deeper, resonating in my chest cavity. "What is that?" I whispered. David shook his head, turning slowly in place to try to locate the source. "I don't know, but it's getting louder." He was right. The humming intensified gradually, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. My hair stood on end and I tasted metal in my mouth. Static electricity, I realized with growing alarm. "David, we need to move, now." But he remained rooted in place, staring upward through the tree canopy. "Look," he breathed. Through gaps in the foliage, the late afternoon sky had taken on a strange quality, darkening not with approaching night but with something else, a localized dimming directly above us, as if something massive was blocking the sun. The humming crescendoed, and with it came a wind that seemed to circle our position, creating a vortex of leaves and debris. David's face was illuminated from above by a blue-white light filtering through the trees, the same color as the orbs we'd seen the previous night. "It's happening," he said, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "They're here." "Who's here?" I shouted over the noise, grabbing his arm. "David, we have to run." He turned to me, eyes reflecting the pulsating light. "I can't, Mike. I need to know." With surprising strength, he pulled free of my grip and moved toward a brightness growing between the trees ahead. I followed, terrified of being separated. We emerged into another small clearing, and I froze at its edge. The humming was deafening now, a physical force pressing against my eardrums. Directly above the clearing, hovering perhaps 100 feet up, was something. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. A distortion in space, as if reality itself was bending around a massive object. Through this distortion came the blue-white light. Not a beam, but a field that encompassed the entire clearing. David walked forward into this light, his body silhouetted against the brilliance. He raised his arms, as if in welcome or surrender. "David!" I screamed, but my voice seemed swallowed by the humming. He turned back to me one last time. His face wore an expression of perfect serenity, all fear and doubt erased. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "It's beautiful." Then the light intensified to unbearable brightness. I raised my arm to shield my eyes, and in that moment of temporary blindness, everything changed. The humming stopped abruptly. The wind died. When I lowered my arm, the clearing was empty. David was gone. Not running away in the distance, not hiding behind a tree, simply gone as if he'd never existed. The forest was silent except for my own panicked breathing. I called his name until my voice gave out. I searched until darkness made it impossible to continue. I returned at first light and searched again, widening my circles, looking for any sign. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, dropped equipment. Nothing. I reported his disappearance as soon as I reached a ranger station. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in that part of Oregon in decades. Dozens of trained personnel, search dogs, even helicopters with thermal imaging combed the area for 2 weeks. They found our campsite from the night we saw the lights. They found the circular depression in the clearing. But of David himself, they discovered nothing. No body, no blood, no torn clothing caught on branches. It was as if he had simply stepped out of our world. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead by misadventure. The case remains open but inactive. The authorities proposed various explanations: animal attack, accidental fall, even the possibility that David had planned his own disappearance. None of these theories accounted for what I had witnessed. In the years since, I've returned to that forest many times, always during the new moon. I've never again seen the lights or felt the humming vibration. But I've met others, hikers, rangers, local residents, who have their own stories of strange phenomena in those mountains. David's journal was never found. His satellite phone never pinged another tower. The photos he took of the circular depression were not on his cloud storage, though he had faithfully uploaded other images from our trip. I've spent countless hours researching similar incidents around the world. Mysterious disappearances in remote areas, unusual light phenomena, missing time. I've joined online forums dedicated to such occurrences and connected with others who've had experiences they can't explain. Some nights I dream of David. In these dreams, he's trying to tell me something important, but I can never quite hear his words. I wake with the certainty that he's not dead, that he's somewhere else trying to reach back across whatever boundary he crossed. 28 years have passed. I'm a different person now. Older, more cautious, obsessively documenting everything in my life as if creating a record for someone who might one day need to find me. I've never married or had children. How could I, knowing what might be out there, waiting in the spaces between what we understand and what we don't? Last month I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page torn from what looked like a journal. The handwriting was unmistakably David's, but the content made little sense. Coordinates, diagrams of constellations, and a repeated phrase, "The threshold is thinning." At the bottom of the page was a date, June 17th, 2025. Exactly 28 years from the day he vanished, but still months in the future as I write this. I don't know what will happen on that date. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. What I do know is that I will be in that forest, at those exact coordinates, waiting. Whether for closure or confirmation, I cannot say. The strangest part? The paper inside the envelope was warm to the touch, just like the flattened vegetation in that perfect circle all those years ago. If you're watching this and have experienced something similar, lights in the wilderness, missing time, a sense of being watched by something beyond ordinary perception, you're not alone. There are more of us than you might think, piecing together fragments of a larger truth. The official explanations, weather phenomena, hallucinations, human error, these satisfy most people. But for those of us who have glimpsed behind the veil, there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. I don't know what happened to David that day in the Oregon forest. I don't know if he was taken or if he went willingly. What I do know is that we are not alone in this world. Or perhaps I should say, we are not alone in this reality. The lights are real. The thresholds between worlds exist. And sometimes people cross over and don't come back. Or at least they haven't come back yet. If you've made it this far in my story, you're clearly interested in these unexplained disappearances and possible otherworldly encounters. Our channel is dedicated to investigating these phenomena, bringing you first-hand accounts from witnesses and connecting dots that mainstream sources ignore. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and your support by hitting that subscribe button means we can continue bringing you these stories from the edge of human experience. If you know someone who's had a similar experience, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing others have witnessed the same phenomena is the first step toward understanding. And leave a comment below if you've ever seen unexplained lights in the wilderness. You might be surprised how many others have seen the same thing. Until next time, keep watching the skies and the forests.